Well, now we're going to turn to another service. We're going to go to the Air Force and Colonel Cedric Leighton, former United States Air Force. He's retired, and he was a former intelligence officer on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's somebody who we turn to often. He's an expert on a lot of things, but he's particularly an expert on cyber intelligence, cyber warfare. Colonel Leighton, welcome back to Defcon 3.
KT, thanks so much for having me again.
Now, we have all read in the newspapers, but we haven't read much about this new virus that seems to be affecting and infecting Iranian computers and the Iranian nuclear weapons program. What's it all about?
Well, it's called Flame, and that's one of the names that it goes by. It is one of the viruses that actually infects computers now, and it's related in some distant ways to Stuxnet and to another virus known as Duku. But what Flame actually does is, instead of stopping things from moving like Stuxnet did, Stuxnet was the virus that went after the centrifuges in the Iranian nuclear program. Well, what Flame does is it watches what's going on your computer. So if you're infected by Flame, if you happen to be one of the target entities that Flame is going after, it will take a look at things like your keystrokes. It may activate your webcam. It may also activate your Bluetooth connection on your computer, especially that's one of the things that laptops have, and then it will try to go after address books on cell phones that are in the neighborhood. So that's one of the big things that it does, and it's basically spyware. So it will open and read your mail, in essence, and find out what you're about, what you're doing, and who you're connected to.
How would it have gotten into the Iranian computers?
Well, there's several possibilities. One of the ways is through a thumb drive. Thumb drives are very ubiquitous and, of course, very convenient, so everybody uses them to put, PowerPoint presentations on them or something like that. But in this particular case, it could be that, or it could be something that was inserted by somebody in a direct way, where they got into the network through not just putting in a thumb drive or a disk, but actually inserted the code by connecting to the computer that they wanted to target, and then from there it spreads. So basically, once one computer is infected, every computer on that network is susceptible to the same kind of infection. In this particular case, because this virus is so malleable and it can move in so many different directions, you can basically target the areas that you're going after. So once you know that you're interested in, let's say, KT's computer, then it would go to somebody else's, and let's say you're connected to Mr. Brown. Well, Mr. Brown's computer will also be infected by it, and that's the way it generally works. What they're really interested in this particular case is going after certain specific countries. So Iran has seen a very large increase in infections as a result of Flame. It's also called Flamer by some other folks. And what's interesting about it is that they were also using a different type of computer language to actually create this particular virus. It's very similar to the language that's used for the game Angry Birds, if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
So what you see in Angry Birds is basically the same computer code that is being used in the Flame computer malware.
All right, so in other words, this is spreading exponentially. One computer has it, and all of a sudden 100 computers have it, and then 1,000 computers have it. Is there any way to stop this?
Well, this one's very difficult to stop. The Iranians say that they have found a way to stop it. I'm not sure I believe
Well, they also say they have a cure for AIDS, but anyway.
Well, that's true, yes. And unfortunately for the rest of the world, those things are exaggerated claims. But in this particular case, KT, what I would say is that most security firms who are honest will tell you that they have no surefire way of stopping it. It was found by coincidence. They were looking for something completely different, and the International Telecommunications Union, which is a UN agency, was concerned about some anomalies that they had discovered on the internet, and they commissioned a Russian computer security firm known as Kaspersky to go after this particular anomaly, and by coincidence they discovered Flame as a result of their searches. And it's one of those viruses that can hide very, very well, and because of that it becomes very, very difficult to find, and chances are you won't even know that your computer has been infected by it.
All right, so is there any way that the Iranians can get Flame out of their computers?
There are certain ways that they could do it. They could, for example, wipe their disk drives completely clean, and chances are that that might take care of at least most of the problem. However, because Flame morphs, it's a morphing virus, and what it does is it changes because of certain things that are going on. For example, if you insert the latest security software in your, like a McAfee suite or a Symantec piece, when you go in there, it actually knows that you're doing that and can actually morph as a result of what you've done to enhance your computer's security. And because you've done that, the virus lays dormant for a while, and then once you're done upgrading your computer virus suite, it comes back to life and sees what you've done, and then it goes and it collects information like it did before the security software was inserted into the computer. So it's very, very difficult to detect. Right now, security firms really don't have a way of going after it and cleaning your computer without drastic measures, and that's really, in many cases, the beauty on one side and the peril on the other of this particular malware.
All right, so this is spyware, really. This is not something that's going to sort of sabotage the Iranian nuclear program. It's just going to spy on everybody in Iran and basically maybe even everybody in the world, right?
Well, potentially it could go that far. Right now the targeted nations are obviously Iran, but also other nations in the Middle East. For example, the Palestinian territories on the West Bank, there's a large infection area there. Israel has had some infections of flame. Saudi Arabia, Syria, the Sudan, and oddly enough, Hungary has seen a spike in infections of this particular type of virus. So the beginning of the process to detect it is obviously occurring, and once the detection piece occurs, then you know that software security firms are in place right now working to develop a solution, but as of right now, they really don't have a concrete solution. But could it spread around the world? Yes, it could, and that's why it becomes very important to have the computer security upgrades in place that you've been using before, but also to keep in mind that everything is potentially vulnerable in this particular case just because of the fact that this virus morphs in a way that is really different from what we've seen in many other cases.
Who do we think did it?
Well, that's always a $64,000
Nobody's claimed
question.
credit. This is not like a bombing in Mumbai or somewhere where somebody says, oh, that was us. Nobody is taking credit for this.
No, and the reason you don't see them taking credit for it is because it bears all the hallmarks of a state-sponsored software development effort. And what that means is that, in essence, they have very complicated code that they put in there. It's basically got 650,000 lines of code that are associated with this particular form of spyware. And because of that, it becomes very, very hard for people to reverse engineer it. So it becomes a very, very difficult area for folks to get into. But what it basically is doing is it's going in and looking at everything that everybody does and picking and choosing which computers to go after. And the other thing is it's not going after office computers per se, even though it does do some of that, but it's mainly focusing on people's home computers. So if somebody is taking work home who's involved in the Iranian nuclear program, they might be a prime target for this particular effort.
Now, on one hand, we're thrilled because this is the Iranians, it's the nuclear program, it's going to cause them just a myriad of problems. But on the other hand, I've got to worry that, is this the new warfare of the future?
Well, it's definitely the new warfare of the future. I think what you'll see in new warfare, KT, is going to be one of those situations where you combine the kinetic with the non-kinetic, and sometimes you can even morph the two within a cyber attack, and that, of course, is a futuristic scenario, but that could definitely happen, and that's a very, very dangerous situation. Although it's difficult to reverse engineer something like Flame, it is not something that I would say is impossible in spite of those 650,000 lines of code. But the other part of it is when you look at where the infections have occurred, you could probably pin this on a very sophisticated government that is involved in this, and that's why a private hacker collective like Anonymous or Lulzsec or something like that is probably not responsible for this, just because it's such a unique development and such a complex development. It becomes a very, very hard thing to go after from that standpoint.
Okay, well, thank you very much for taking a very complicated thing and making even me understand it.
My pleasure.
Colonel Cedric Leighton, former intelligence officer of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And by the way, I'm going to say it because you probably can't. We think there's a large probability that the country involved and who may have started the flame virus is Israel. Very high-tech country, very sophisticated technology. The vice president of Israel just yesterday said that, well, you know, I won't rule it out, basically. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
You bet, KT. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.